I'm Jim Check. You're watching Now Media. With me, Harman Bhangu, Conservative MLA for Langley Abbotsford. Really driving the bus on this BC Ferry decision. Right now, you guys are calling for David Eby, the Premier, to rescind that BC Ferry decision.
Yeah, and it's not just us actually. Pierre Poilievre has actually called now to rescind the $1 billion loan that Mark Carney and the federal Liberals have given the BC Ferries.
Yeah, I interviewed Dan Albus just recently as well, the MP, the local MP here. And he said he was going to try to get it to committee and see if he could get one Liberal and one Bloc to vote and make sure that they get an inquiry. And they did do that. So there is going to be a federal inquiry into this because David Eby said the Fed should mind their own business. And apparently it is their business when they've doled out $1 billion in a low interest loan to the for this BC Ferry decision.
Yeah, it's interesting how David Eby takes that position then, but every other time it's completely different. And one thing right now is that I really want to hammer away on is we really need to create some jobs here for British Columbians that can actually afford a life, build a home, have a family, and buy a house. And it feels like every policy, everything the NDP is doing is working against British Columbians.
And then one of the things that Eby has said to defend himself, he said that no British Columbia company has bid on the project or Canadian company. But then, like we hear from C-SPAN and then say, well, it was pointless to bid if it was basically driven by cost. And, and then China uses inferior steel. They have lots of human rights violations. Some people even accuse them of slave labor. And then they also have no industrial carbon tax. What have you heard from C-SPAN? And you've done quite a bit of investigation on this yourself.
Well, yeah, with C-SPAN, they actually are very good shipbuilders. They're leading technology and icebreaker ship technology. The Canadian government trusts them with it, and they actually have ways that they can build these ships. And I believe they have time coming up in 2029, and their schedule clears up a bit, and they could probably take on one or two ferries. And in the meantime, why not work with our allied countries that share the same values and principles of life? And instead of shipping our hard paid tax dollars off to China, where they interfere in our elections, they don't have the same principles and freedoms of life that we do. It's really concerning right now how every step of the way, whenever anything like this happens, we're just shipping jobs away. I don't think that's a good way to create economic stability here in British Columbia and actually provide the jobs that we need to keep here. And also with the industrial and carbon tax, I think this doesn't just affect the shipbuilding, it affects every entrepreneur in BC, every business in BC from competing on the global market. You're seeing that time and time after again. Big manufacturers are simply packing up and they're leaving British Columbia.
Yeah, I mean, we talk, Mark Carney laid it out and he said that the biggest threat to Canada is China. And then this shipbuilder is actually tied to the CCP. So that's one of the things. And then, you got Melanie Joly, the head of, the economic policies, is saying that we need to use Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum in infrastructure projects. And this fits the bill on both of those. This is according to Mark Carney, there's the biggest threat. So why is it going to China? And then with using Canadian steel and Canadian aluminum, this would use a lot of those.
Well, this is the thing. They say one thing and they do another. They say it's the biggest threat, and here we are literally funding them. It's very hypocritical. And with the Chinese steel, we've seen from Patolo Bridge, there's been issues. We know from the Johnson Bridge in Victoria, there's been huge issues. And same, you can go on, this pattern isn't just here in Canada, it's in the States too. Bay Bridge in Oakland. They went to save $250 million, ended up costing them $5 billion. And Victoria, they had to tear down a bridge that they had built for 2 years. That's completely unacceptable.
And the big thing that I've noticed, I mean, from when my dad was a big promoter of the NDP, he was a union job steward and all that, and the NDP used to be for the worker. And it seems to have flipped, though. Like, you look at this policy or this decision in itself, you're going to another country for cheaper labor. You're going to another country for an inferior product. Doesn't that go right against what the NDP used to stand for? And it seems like the Conservatives are now standing for the BC worker.
Well, you're seeing a shift right now. The NDP, they have really taken the working class for granted. Their policies have directly impacted us, especially coming from trucking, the carbon tax. Then they add on the low carbon fuel standard. Then every other policy there is with ways that jobs are supposed to be bid on with the CBA and other things. They're destroying it for local businesses, especially the Canadian, British Columbian based businesses. That's who they need to wake up and start standing up for. Otherwise, we're not going to have a lot of these industries left here in British Columbia. And they've completely abandoned the union sector workers. And they're doing it time and time after again. And I think they need to be called out on it. And you're seeing a lot of unions stand up and take a stand against them with this right now.
What is your stance or the Conservative Party's stance on China in general right now, as far as shipping jobs over there and just some of the trade stuff? If Mark Carney says it's the greatest threat to Canada right now, security threat, and we've seen it in interference in some of the elections as well.
Right now, they're tariffing our hardworking farmers and fishermen. They're having to raise prices by 50% on British Columbians and Canadians. And here we are sending our hard-earned tax dollars to them so they have an economic revenue generated from it, which is literally going to undermine our way of life. This is completely absurd. They kept on saying elbows up, elbows up. Right now, their elbows are up, but their head is in the sand.
You said Pierre Poilievre just came out with a statement. What do you want to see from the federal government on this right now? What would you like to see? You'd like to pull that loan, because I don't think they can make EB. They could pressure EB, but they could definitely pull that loan.
They should pull the loan, and they should put pressure EB to cancel that contract. We should work with our allied countries that share the same values. And also, why not start the interprovincial trade right now? You have the Ontario Ford government, Transport Minister Prab Sakaria, he just rolled out a plan incentivizing shipbuilding. Why don't we work with other shipbuilders in Canada, get the first vessels going right now with one of them, and that would probably be delivered in that 2029 time frame that China is supposed to deliver the first vessel. Then the next two vessels, it's not clear when they're going to be delivered. They say the fourth will be delivered in 2031. Right now, C-SPAN will have time in 2029. They can maybe get started one or two, get two of those ships to market in like a year later. But the thing is, we're keeping the jobs here. We're keeping that revenue here. We're providing good paying jobs. I think British Columbians deserve it.
And we all know that economic activity, even if it costs a little bit more here, the economic activity that's created from from the welder that goes to buy, from the barbershop and all that kind of stuff. So putting $1 billion in the economy will probably create another $5 billion of economic activity in British Columbia.
Exactly. And all those local businesses, they're going to be frequented for lunches, dinners and other things in grocery stores close by. A lot of people might be like, hey, hon, I'm just going to pop by the grocery store here so I don't have to drive through a bunch of traffic and get in at the end of it, right? So there's a lot of things that play in. And I think we need to take advantage of this. You don't get opportunities. A lot of countries that have a coastline invest in heavy industries that can generate jobs and revenue for the province that they can use to build the projects and infrastructure that they vitally need. We need to take a hard decision and consider that right now. It's the time to start is right now.
What do you think of the Premier's comments whenever he talks about Conservatives of calling you far right or your party far right? Is there any truth to that claim? Because that's their typical thing they come out with when they attack the Conservatives, that you're far right and that you're extremists and that you're Trumpian and different things like that. How do you respond to that?
This is one thing that I hear all the time. But the one thing that David Eby doesn't seem to figure is, what do other people maybe think of him? He is the most extreme premier in British Columbian history. This is a guy that wrote a book to circumvent our justice system and aid and help criminals get off the criminal justice system. You're telling me he has any audacity to call anyone extreme? A guy that pushed drugs on people, made it more accessible for people to keep on with their addictions? You're telling me this guy has any ilk to be calling anyone else extreme? He needs to look himself in the mirror first.
And we did see the other day, just to switch gears a little bit here, because you talked about the coastline, and I won't keep you long. I know we said we got 15 minutes here, and I'll be respectful of your time. Doug Ford, we brought up Doug Ford. Doug Ford and Daniel Smith made a big deal yesterday. And that deal seems to be, for the benefit of Canadians, that seems to be the economic engine. British Columbia used to be really a big part of that economic engine of the West. And it seems to be lagging and falling behind. And we're racking up debt. The Alberta is looking at surpluses. What would you do? Like, I mean, they want a pipeline to the West Coast. And then we got that tanker ban on the West Coast. That's really a problem because there's no sense getting an oil pipeline to the West Coast if you can't put a super tanker in there. So what's the Conservative plan to kind of like work towards that, or even discussions with Alberta right now?
We need to invest in our north, in our interior areas. We haven't made a significant investment for a very long time. Our leader, John Rustad, talked about this during the campaign trail, that we need to get into mining. We need to invest. We need to create rail systems that can connect it. We have Prince Rupert Port we're barely utilizing. We need to make a significant investment. Look at the property here in the Lower Mainland. A lot of manufacturers aren't looking to pay $5-7 million an acre, but they are willing to go to areas there. And if we don't catch on to this, Manitoba is going to continuously drive the economic force of entrepreneurship there for manufacturing. They have a robust train system. Once you get into Chicago, they can get all across the U.S. into their markets, and they can use their ports too if the Canadian system isn't set up for them. That is where we need to take a real hard look at, is building up our rural areas, investing in them, and building some communities at the same time. We go into areas, we have big, huge jobs, we run camps, but we don't build the communities up and bring some services, some schools, and everything else. We need to start building this province. And I'm really happy that John Rustad, our leader, actually brought this up during the campaign, is making that investment in the north and the interior areas. It is desperately needed. People forget this province, a huge chunk of its revenue came from Fort St. John. That's how we built out the Lower Mainland. We need to make an investment again.
Yeah, British Columbia, the top two industries, mining and forestry, and both are really suffering. Forestry is, and we've done so many stories on forestry. I won't get into too much today because we're
all under this NDP government too, right? Look at the LNG. We had a chance to get it to the global market and set the tone for the global price. We missed out now. Japan said it. We have different regulations, different processes, different worker rates we have to go through, and it makes it harder for us. We could have been the leading ones to the world on that. We cannot miss that opportunity on our critical minerals and mines that we have right here in British Columbia.
Well, that's been 15 minutes. I do thank you for your time. Very, very appreciative of that, and we'd love to have you back on. And I commend you and your work. And I know I had Renee on. We do be on the ballot every week, and she says you're one of the champions in the Conservative Party right now. And she mentioned also Eleanor Sturko for sticking on that other file in the drug crisis that we have here in British Columbia, and this BC Ferry one. What do you think the chances are of I'll close with, what do you think the chances are of the province pulling back that BC Ferry deal right now?
I'm thinking they are going to have to take a hard look at it. I think British Columbians are really upset. And more than that, all of Canada is looking at British Columbia to see what move they make, the decision that they're going to make. It's going to set the tone for a lot of people in this country that feel, do we have a chance to live here? Do we have a chance to have a family, raise some kids, buy a home? It's going to be a really hard look. And I want to thank you for having me on, and the listeners for tuning in. I really appreciate you taking the time.
All right, thank you, Harman, and good luck out there. And we'll see you next time we have you on. And we do thank you for watching Now Media.
Pleasure.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us.